I'd like to acknowledge all elders in the room and our friends.
My name's Brendan. I'm a cultural representative, cultural educator for the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council in Sydney. And for those of you that don't know about our Aboriginal Land Councils, under the Land Rights Act, we are the cultural authority, the guardians and custodians of land within our boundaries. Our boundaries cover the same boundaries as the Eora Nation, from the ocean, surrounded by three of Australia's most beautiful rivers, the Hawkesbury, the Nepean and the Georges rivers. In between those three mighty and beautiful rivers, there are 29 tribes that make up the Eora Nation. And the name of the tribe that the land we're gathered on here this morning is Gadigal. Before I welcome you to country, it's important you understand there's no more Gadigal left. Traditional owners have been wiped off the face of the earth. No more left. This is why we have our Aboriginal Land Council to fill that void. In less than 50 years, the Gadigal people were on the front line when Cook and Phillip landed. In less than 50 years, 80% of Aboriginal people were wiped out within Sydney and the East Coast. The biggest killer of my people was disease, smallpox and the flu. And the first people to go were our elders. They went our wisdom and knowledge. Second to go were the young people. They went the future. The definition of traditional owner is not to have an ongoing, continual connection to country. And unfortunately, that was severed. So the first wave, the disease, the second wave brought the land grab. And with the land grab came the massacres and the slaughters. There was 500 of my family members, men, women and children, that were slaughtered just over water for cattle to drink. We then had the kidnap generation. I prefer not to call it the stolen generation because we were kidnapped. My mother was kidnapped at the age of 5, locked up in a jail for 2 weeks. 1971, I was born at Crown Street Women's Hospital. I don't think that hospital exists anymore, but unfortunately, that's the last time that I ever felt my mother's touch in 1971. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the second generation of my family that's missing. Never found Mum, never saw her again. 7 years ago, I found her grave. 7 years ago, I found I'm one of 10 siblings of orphans. And the history that I share, this is just a very brief history. Because when you look at the world of the country, I just ask everyone to have a little bit of thought of what we've been through to get to where we are today. My people are the world's oldest living culture. The world's oldest living culture. We've been here since time immemorial. You will never find stories throughout this country about we've travelled from another country to land here. Because that's never happened. You will only find stories relating to the creation time. Those creation time stories are no different than the creation time stories you hear and read in any holy book. So we've been here. I always like to say we've been here for 250,000 years plus BC. And the BC stands for before good. That gives me great honour. It's always an honour to perform welcome to the country ceremony. It's not a ceremony we've just come up with in the last 5 years. It's a ceremony traditionally we've welcomed each other to the country again since time immemorial. 10 years ago in Australia, we would never have had a welcome to the country, never have had an acknowledgement of the country. So it's a great honour for me to be able to perform that ceremony back on the country. And I thank you for having me here, because by having me here, you've become a part of our rejuvenation, revitalisation of tradition back on country. Gadigal's one of 29 tribes that I mentioned earlier, make up the Eora Nation. Have we all heard of that word Eora? Does anyone know what that word means? I'm sure most of us have used that word Eora. Eora means man. The first contact between Palma and Palma is live just down there at Botanical Garden. She was asked what you call this country, and she wanted what Botanical Gardens Conservatory of Music is actually built on top of sacred dancing ground for men, kangaroo and dingo ceremony. But you're a man. It gives me great honour this morning to welcome you all here to Gadigal country on behalf of those Gadigal ancestors, because their spirit is still in the land and the water. On behalf of Metropolitan Aboriginal Land Authority on these lands, once again, welcome to Gadigal country. I'd also like to give my apologies. I'd love to hang around on myself for a PB, but unfortunately I've got to go and pay that white man by the name of Wilson for parking on my own land. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome to Gadigal country and thank you for having me.
Uncle Brendan, thank you. Such beautiful words, and I even learned something today. I thought my mother had instilled a lot of Aboriginal tradition in me, but I found out even more today. And I can't wait to tell her when I get to the home tonight.
Thank you.
Our first speaker is Fiona York, who's the Executive Officer of the Housing the Aid Action Group. And Fiona, I would like to come forward.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Glenn Marie. My name is Fiona York. I'm the Executive Officer of Housing for the Aged Action Group. I would like to acknowledge as well that we're on Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation, and thanks very much to Uncle Brendan for that welcome, for welcoming me to this beautiful country here today. And thanks, Glenn Marie, for your ongoing support of the Aging on the Edge advocacy efforts in New South Wales. It's been invaluable. I'd also like to thank our guest speakers who you will be hearing from later on today, and they are Rose Jackson, MLC, Alex Greenwich, MP, and Tenny Leong, MP, and also Associate Professor Emma Fowler, who will be presenting the research today. We'll also be hearing from Minister McLaren Jones and playing a recorded video that she sent through to us. I would also like to thank Robert Fitzgerald, the New South Wales Ageing and Disability Commission, Abigail Boyle, MLC, James Secretary of the Department of Communities and Justice, Tracy Burton, the CEO of Uniting New South Wales, Trina Jones, the CEO of Homelessness New South Wales, Joanna Quilty, the CEO of NCOS, members of the Ministerial Advisory Council on the Aging, and HAG's New South Wales Lived Experience Advisory Group members. So thank you all very much for coming today, and thank you to everyone joining us via Zoom. We are at a critical time in New South Wales where decision makers can't ignore the housing crisis that we're in and the impacts that it has on older people. HAG has over 40 years advocated for the housing needs of older people, and we will do so with our sector colleagues. We are proud of the 140 member and supporter coalition that we've built in New South Wales, and it shows the importance of the issue today. Our event today is launching some new data that shows that older New South Wales. But behind the numbers are real people and real people's lives. We cannot underestimate the impact this is having on the real lives of older people. So we will also be hearing from some people with lived experience of that issue today. And I really urge you to listen to those stories. Don't just look at the numbers, but look at the impact that it's having on real people. This is the first of many reports, and there'll be more reports coming out when the ABS releases the homelessness data later in the year. As many of you would already know, we are disappointed with the inquiry, and we think it was a missed opportunity. But that's not the end of the road, because we have a growing evidence base, including the parliamentary inquiry itself, and that's recognising that older people are becoming the new face of homelessness. We appreciate that there are some measures in place, and we welcome initiatives such as the Together Home and the Core and Cluster model for domestic and family violence. But we know that these measures are not tailored for the needs of older people who need a specialist response. The drivers of homelessness are different for many older people. Older women are less likely to be sleeping rough, and a small proportion of them experience homelessness as a result of domestic and family violence. Oftentimes, it's because of a relationship breakdown, retiring into poverty due to limited superannuation, age discrimination, and other systemic barriers that continue throughout their whole lives. With the election coming up in only 6 weeks, we have a window of opportunity to make older people and homelessness a key issue. We know the solutions and we'll hear from decision makers today who have the power to change the systems. So thanks again to everyone for joining today and for your ongoing commitment and support from the New South Wales Ageing on the Edge Coordination Group. I'd also like to mention that the report is available at the front here today, and it's also available online for those joining us via Zoom. There'll be a link in the chat to that. And the design on the front was kindly provided to us by someone who's here today, Rothy Taylor. So thanks very much for drawing that design. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Fiona. I'd now like to invite Michelle, if you could please come forward. Michelle Cook, there she is. Michelle joined New South Wales Lived Experience Advocacy Group in the hope of working with others to shine a spotlight on the issues of housing in New South Wales. Michelle, by sharing her story, hopes she can show there's issues for ordinary, everyday people and that older women are facing also in our regional towns. I welcome Michelle Cook.
Good morning. I'm honoured to be here today as part of the Lived Experience Advocacy Group of Housing for the Aged Action Group. Homelessness is such a big issue. Whilst we would like to think that it won't happen to you, all it takes is meeting the wrong person. My story started when I thought I met a wonderful man. We fell in love, got married and had a baby. Unfortunately, my fairy tale was an illusion. It all changed the day he tried to hit me with the baby in his arms. I distinctly remember, back in the beginning, sitting in a safe room at a court, looking around me thinking, I've never been to a courtroom before, and here I am, assaulted by the man who promised to love me forever. As is so common in the reasons for homelessness, mine started with family and domestic violence. I was married for 2 years and then spent the next 15 years in and out of court as a support for my children, my home, our future. I worked hard. I have a university degree and a professional job, but all of that was taken by someone who wanted to punish me for leaving, for saying no to domestic violence. The laws on coercive control have just recently been introduced in New South Wales, but it was me and my children paid the price. They continue to pay the price. When a local area commander sits in your lounge room and says an ABO is just a piece of paper, you just need to move away. You know the system is broken. The police were there because a judge had ordered the court had stopped a court proceeding and ordered the police to do a welfare check on my daughter. The same court where a policeman had told me to wait outside the court, then came out to tell me he had dropped all the charges. He was a father and he wasn't going to charge another father with family violence. We had to give up our home, my job, the children's schools, our family, our friends, all our social supports to be safe. I had purchased my home, paid the deposit, the legals, the stamp duty, the mortgage from day dot. I had a court order that said the house was to be mine, but that didn't matter either. He simply refused to sign the transfer, pay the mortgage, or allow me to pay my mortgage. When I attempted to list out the house, I got a phone call saying a man had threatened the tenants and they were moving out. He wrote to the bank telling them there was a dispute on the mortgage. Yes, he wanted to sell the home to force myself and my children from the place we loved, the place we called home. I remember vividly a conversation with the person at the bank. He told me that once a year he would see a case like mine, where an ex-partner tried to create financial ruin. Although I was capable of paying my mortgage, I'd always paid the mortgage. The bank decided they wouldn't give the mortgage to a single female with dependents. My qualifications, my employment, my payment history were not as important as my marital status. Times were tough, but I had persistence. Again, I remember the day I sat there and rang all the services offered for financial assistance. On a piece of pink A4 paper, I wrote the list as I made each phone call, hoping to get someone who might be able to help us. Each call I retold the story, relived the devastation, only be told, that's complicated for us. At the end of the day, I had filled that A4 page with services that were government funded, charities set up to help people in need. Not once did they provide me help at the time I needed help. For months, no, actually, for years, I persisted. With each call, you get your hopes up, only to find another dead end. You go from organisation to organisation, from court to court, at times 3 different courts, trying to advocate for yourself, for your children, when legal fees take everything, and at the same time work, be mum, and cope with the situation. The financial assets and security I had built up over 25 years of working had been destroyed with a 2-year marriage. I know I shouldn't be a statistics, but I'm simply a person that has fallen through the cracks. What's my experience of emergency housing? After a court hearing, the police deemed it unsafe for me to return home, and I was taken to an emergency shelter. I stayed for about 4 days. I was told not to interact with other residents. It was best to keep to yourself. When the social worker finally had the time to sit down with me, she told me there was no point in applying for housing. The waiting list was just too long. Thinking back, we moved 11 times over that period while waiting for a court outcome. Sometimes at a day's notice, between temporary, meanwhile housing, friends' spare rooms, shared housing, until I eventually found an affordable place to call home. I moved to regional New South Wales just as the pandemic hit in March 2020. I had a friend who grew up in the region and had gone home to care for his father. Government policy is for ageing in place, keeping older people in their homes. So we gave up our home, job, family and friends again to move to a regional town and care for his elderly dad. But how is that going for the sandwich generation? You see, trying to find a home in regional New South Wales isn't easy either. There are a number of factors, 2 most important being the lack of available rentals and the jump in property prices. We tried buying but gave up. As I said earlier, prices had doubled in 2 years. We were making suitable offers only to realise agents preferred Sydney investors who were paying over market prices. For investors, regional properties are a bargain. In Sydney, we're talking about housing affordability. In the country, affordability is one thing, but the bigger issue is there are no homes to rent. But how will that change the structure of these towns when locals can no longer afford to buy in a town they grew up in, or as in our case, can't find a home to live in when providing care for elderly parents? I had a look at the properties available in town this week. There are 2. One a studio apartment in a boarding house, the other a 4-bedroom house available on the 15th of February. The real estate offers an inspection over video call. There seems to be a post on our community Facebook page once a week with someone desperate for a rental. I applied for a property in East Street in my town about June last year. Lovely townhouses, well suited for older people. But my proposed rental did not happen. I later found out the property was sold to a government entity and will be removed from public rental market. But I tell you, my gosh, the intrusiveness of the rental process. They wanted all the usual, a letter from my employer, payslips, bank accounts, driver's licence, passports, reference, rental history. They wanted a separate form for all the information for everyone who was living in the house. But then they asked for my solicitor and my accountant details. I really felt intimidated by the process. Being told you are not eligible for a loan because you've been a carer, the history of working or stability of assets don't matter. Similarly, getting a mortgage when you're older. The bank asks for a 40% deposit on a $100,000 mortgage. It's a catch-22 situation, a system issue. Banks require full-time jobs as a prerequisite for a mortgage, but full-time roles are hard to come by in the regions. Since I have been there, I have seen employers take advantage of staff. I have seen wage theft, underemployment, casualisation of the workforce, even when they're crying out for workers. Also, the non-for-profits and community organisations that use volunteers as the new business model. Who are those volunteers? Older women. Being a volunteer means you're not being paid. Businesses are maximising profits at the expense of old women. Women who are freely giving their time, their effort, turning up week after week as they have always done. Further, as COVID gave us work from home and remote working, people in Sydney incomes can move to the country, earn a Sydney wage and supplemental a regional lifestyle, but someone from the regions doesn't have the opportunity to get a good paying Sydney job and move. And now from the recent floods, we see a new class of homelessness, people who have lost their homes in the floods. Where are we going to house these residents? One lady I know owns the real estate agent, but she too now lives in a caravan, and an older couple displaced by the flood. I have friends who are too worried to report the problems in their rentals for fear the tenancy will be terminated. There are no tradies, no builders to meet the demand to repair the flood damages, and that's after you've dealt with the insurance companies. Getting away over Christmas, I booked to go camping with friends, a nice break near the water. I arrived at the caravan park on Christmas Eve. As I set up, the person on the side next to me came over for a chat. I was just devastated when he told me he was living there in a tent after being in care for his mother for many years. But Mum's dementia was too much now, and he had to place her in care. He worked full-time, but now lived in a caravan park. It was Christmas Eve in a council-run caravan park. Because me and my friends had booked the sites, he was told to leave. Holiday makers prioritised over people living there permanently. The weekly tariff raised for the summer. I would have cancelled my booking if only I had known. I'm told I have strength, I have resilience, but I don't want to be strong. My home was lost because of a court system that refused to enforce its own orders. The Office of Legal Services found the solicitor in breach of professional misconduct for forcing the house sold and keeping the funds. The Law Society sat on the case for 7 years. House prices doubled while I waited for the legal outcome. I doubt I will ever own a home again. I'm educated. I worked hard my whole life, but I am female. I am in the hidden cohort of older women at risk of homelessness. The odds are stacked against me. I recently approached Centrelink to see if there's any assistance I could get. While others got bonus pandemic payments, I had supported myself, but I knew I now needed some help. The flood was the last battle. Even though I was in a Centrelink office, I was told to go over to the computer and fill in the paperwork. When I asked about housing assistance, the worker simply wrote, "Link to home" on a yellow post-it note and handed it to me. Like so many others, it did not help me to connect to a service. I am part of an emerging trend. I am an older woman in a financially vulnerable situation at greatest risk of homelessness. I don't qualify as a priority on the social housing list until I'm 80. I have 28 years to wait. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Michelle, for sharing your story with us. Sadly, you'll hear this too often. I did an interview with Jane Casso for the cover story for the Weekend magazine, but I was not prepared for what was going to follow. From the next day, all day and night, all hours, and it went through for weeks, I had calls from women, homeless women, and they tracked me down through my Celebrant website. The other thing is that they all have the same cry, the system, we can't navigate the system. There's no one there to talk to, no one to give us answers. And then the other thing was too that, they didn't think anyone was listening. They said, "Be our voice, you must keep doing this because no one's listening to us." And as you can see from Michelle, many are tertiary educated. Most were sleeping in their cars, others had mattresses in a friend's garage. They weren't victims. That's the one thing, women are not victims. They want to contribute to society, they want to retrain their skills. But we've got to work with these women to help rebuild their human spirit so they once again, with retraining their skills, can contribute to community once more. And we have to teach them financial literacy. So many, I know, said they wish they had had that. I know I did too. I wished I had had growing up. There's a fundamental failure of government, as we all know, to see the major social crisis that's especially actually affecting this demographic of women just post-50. They constitute a third of Australian women, as we know. From their mid-40s, they start to lose jobs, they find themselves unemployable because of their age, and we won't go into ageism in the workforce because that's really rife. The below poverty level job seeker and pension payments leave them unable to pay increasing rents, mortgages, energy and fuel costs. Many have no super, and growing numbers inevitably find themselves, as we know, impoverished and homeless. The government's failure to act in the last budget on many levels is entrenching a class of impoverished older women in Australia, which is exactly what Michelle said. It's also sending a serious message to our younger women. It's saying that beyond your 50s, expect to go over a cliff, because you'll be on your own unless you're a woman of independent means. And that's what we've come to. I'd now like to ask Emma Power, please come forward. As in, right up back. Emma Power is Associate Professor in Geography and Urban Studies in the School of Social Sciences and an ICS Institute Fellow. Her Australian Research Council Fellowship, Ageing, Home and Housing Security among Single Asset Poor Older Women, from 2015 to 2019, investigated how housing policy, governance and ongoing housing mobility inform how single older women who do not own a home create and maintain a sense of home and security. Please welcome Emma Power.
Thank you, first of all, Michelle, I can't see you now, for sharing that powerful story, reminding us why we're all here. I'd like to start by paying my respects and acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and of course thank Uncle Brendan for the powerful welcome that he gave us and the reminder of a much deeper property crisis that actually stretches out behind our meeting today. Also like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands that we've all travelled through and from today. In my case, that's from the Darug and Gundungurra people in the Blue Mountains. I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this room. So I'm really pleased to be able to launch some of the first data on older people's housing and security from Census 2021. This is work that's been a collaboration between HAG, Swinburne, Curtin and Western Sydney universities. We already know that growing numbers of older people in New South Wales are struggling with insecure housing. More and more households are renting, and they are renting for longer periods. At the same time, we know that rents are escalating. So some parts of Sydney experienced a 25% increase in rents in the 12 months to December last year. And in January this year, the vacancy rate was only 1%. These are crisis levels. In March 2022, before that increase even happened, the Anglicare Rental Affordability Snapshot found that less than 1% of rentals nationally were affordable for a single person on the aged pension, and only 1.4% were affordable for couples. So what does the new data tell us? It tells us that the population in New South Wales is ageing. So older people make up a greater proportion of the population now than they did 10 years ago. Next slide. Aged pension calculations in Australia assume that recipients are homeowners. However, the proportion of older people in New South Wales who own their own home outright is declining. It's dropped 4.3% in the last decade. Next slide. This means that more people aged 55 and over are still paying off their mortgages. And there is significant risk that these growing numbers of people will hit retirement age with an active mortgage. Now, the second problem that the census highlights are the growing numbers of older people struggling outside of home ownership. Next slide. In New South Wales, this group is growing. The proportional increase is significant. So in 2011, 8.5% of people aged 55 and over lived in the private rental sector. But by 2021, this had increased to 11.2%. Next slide. What is most staggering, though, is what we can see on this slide. The sheer numbers of people affected. In New South Wales, there were nearly 240,000 renters aged 55 and over in 2021. That's over 100,000 new renters than a decade before, or I should say older private renters than a decade before. That's nearly a 75% increase in 10 years. And that's nearly double the rate that this age group has increased in New South Wales. What's particularly worrying in this data is that lower income households, you can flip the slide, are overrepresented. So in 2021, around half of New South Wales residents aged 55 and over who rented from a private landlord had an income in the lowest 40% of the population. Outside of Sydney, the proportion's even greater. We have around 2/3 of older renters who declared their income earning in the bottom 40% of the population. There's been a 57% increase in the number of lowest income households or Q1 households renting in the last decade, and a 95% increase in Q2 households, which are those earning in the bottom 20 to 40%. And I think we can probably guess that's because they're increasingly being squeezed out of home ownership. Next slide, please. Older women are overrepresented amongst low-income renters. In 2021, 52.6% of renters who earned in the bottom 20% of incomes were women. And this group increased in numbers by nearly 60% in the last decade. Since the census was recorded, rents have spiralled, vacancy rates have dropped to near record lows, and the consequences of this are really significant. Homelessness data from Census 2021 is going to be released in the next few months, and then we're going to start reporting on homelessness trends amongst older people in New South Wales over the last decade. But what we know is that homelessness data is only the tip of the iceberg. Hidden within the numbers that I've just quoted are much vaster numbers of older people who are struggling at the edges of the private rental sector. They are living in substandard housing, they are cutting back food, they are living in conditions that are too hot in summer and too cold in winter because they simply can't afford these basic necessities after they pay rent. Older people are living like this in our cities and they're living like this in our regions. So I'd like to acknowledge Therese Hall, who's at the back of the room. Therese is a PhD candidate who's studying with me at Western Sydney University, and she's spent the last month interviewing older low-income women in the Northern Rivers about their housing experiences. The women that Therese has been interviewing are what we think of as the hidden homeless. They're not visible on the street, they don't show up in homelessness data. They face stark options when they encounter housing instability. Things like couch surfing, inappropriate house shares, house sitting, living in caravans or other too small dwellings. Living in marginal places like these saves these women, for want of a better word, from sleeping in their cars, but it has significant effects on their physical and mental health. One woman that Therese spoke with described her search for a shared house in Tweed Heads in 2018 when she was 55. The woman, Natalie, recalled a man who had 2 large rabbits living in his apartment and who told her to watch out for the rabbit pee on the floor. She described independent living as highly important to her, and so she chose to live alone in a 20 square metre disused motel room in Tweed Heads for several years instead of sharing. She explained it was rubbish, absolute rubbish. It had been neglected for years. The motel has since been sold, and Natalie is now in what she describes as a difficult share accommodation arrangement on the Gold Coast. Another woman, Belinda, aged 51, has had 3 unsuccessful house shares since moving to the Northern Rivers from Cairns 2 months ago. In each case, she was paying around $300 a week to live in someone else's house. She doesn't have any furniture, but she's got a lot of stuff still in storage in Cairns. She explained that the ever-looming instability really makes it hard to get on with what you have to do. Julie is aged 81. She's currently paying a friend a little board to sleep on her couch in Brunswick Heads while she looks for something appropriate. Stephanie, aged 55, has spent 7 of her 17 years in the Northern Rivers living in garages, not by choice, but by necessity. And she explained to Therese, "My mental health has deteriorated because of that. In winter, they were cold like a fridge, and in summer, they were hot like an oven." Zoe, who suffers from chronic health conditions, has been house sitting full-time for the past 3 years. She's moved 84 times in that period. In my own research, I documented the experiences of low-income older women in Sydney in this report in 2020 and in a related series of publications since then. Women in that work told us of their incredible fear of housing loss. They live with the knowledge that on any given day they could get a notice to vacate. One woman, Jenny, described this ongoing anxiety that she'd been experiencing since her fixed-term lease had finished. She said, I don't want to open my email at night time in case there's an eviction notice in there. The uncertainty is horrific. Other women described anxiety just walking out to check their letterbox. The fear was so great that women lived in substandard properties. They avoided asking for repairs where possible because they were worried that the request might end in homelessness. Gwen took the risk. She discussed a mould problem with her landlady, and she was told, if I didn't like it, I could move. Lily lived without an oven. Sophie lived with leaking taps in the bathroom and a broken screen door. And Liz said to us, you really don't want to make waves too much in case they think, well, stop it, we'll just put it on the market. Many of these places were substandard in other ways too. They were too hot in summer, too cold in winter. Tony lived in a cold region and told me how she bought thick curtains she could take with her when she moved. She'd clad the outside of 2 rentals in tarpaulin to try and stop the draft. Others went to bed in mid-afternoon so they could stay warm under thick duvets and blankets. Sophie limited her energy use by cooking every second day. She said, I don't iron, a damn washing machine doesn't go, I haven't got an electric heater, I don't have a fan up here, I don't have air conditioning. She also cut down on food so that she could meet her rent expenses, and she consequently lost weight. These can only be described as stories of crisis. They are stories that are widespread and they are hidden in plain sight across our state, in our cities and in our regions. This is what life is like for many of the low-income renters who make up the statistics that I quoted this morning. Last slide. Part of the problem is that there are fewer and fewer housing alternatives. We can see this playing out in social housing data. The census points to the declining proportion of older people in social housing in our state, even while the proportion of these people in our state grows. So our housing system is failing this group and has been for some time. Thank you.
Now, Trina, here we go, Trina Jones, I've said my bit. Trina is the CEO of Homelessness New South Wales. She has over 15 years' experience in leading responses to complex social issues, including homelessness, housing affordability, community safety, food insecurity, and drug and alcohol issues. Please welcome Trina Jones.
Thanks very much for having me here today. I would also like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the land of the Gadigal people and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I would also like to extend my respect to the people in the room who have shared their stories today and who do continue to share their stories so that we can achieve meaningful change. So I've been invited today to give a little bit of a centre on the issue of homelessness in New South Wales, as well as some of the solutions that we are proposing as the peak body. Thank you. Go for the next slide there, please. So who are we? We are Homelessness New South Wales. We exist to build the capability of people and the capacity of systems to end homelessness. We have a vision for a future where everyone has a safe place to call home. And we are supported by over 190 members representing thousands of staff across New South Wales, delivering specialist homelessness services, as well as members who have lived experience of homelessness, allies who work in periphery services, and change makers who want to support us to make a difference. When we talk about ending homelessness, what we mean is that it is rare, brief, and non-recurring, because we know now it is common, it is recurring, and it's happening to more people. So when we talk about ending homelessness, this is what we mean, okay? Go for the next one there, thank you. So I'm just when I say people are homeless, and many in this room would have experience in this and are probably coming at it from a different perspective. But to the average person, when you talk about homelessness, they think about a person sleeping on the street, okay? They think about a person who is rough sleeping. But that's actually just the tip of the iceberg, and it was great to hear Professor reference that earlier. These stats are the tip of the iceberg overall, but what we know about people experiencing homelessness is only 7% of those people are actually sleeping rough. The vast majority of people are hidden, they're not seen. They're sleeping on couches, they're in garages, as we've heard, staying with friends, they're in crisis accommodation. They're in overcrowding situations, sometimes in multi-generational family situations that can lead to family breakdown. Thank you. And so what do we know? We know that there's a growing number of people in need. Recent disasters have led to thousands of people needing more help. We have had compounding issues in the state: floods, fires, pandemic, rising cost of living, plague in some areas, mouse plague infesting households, right? So we've had this compounding number of issues at a time when more people need support. We know that in 2021-22, over 68,500 people were supported by specialist homelessness services. But we also know in that same year, almost 50% of people who sought support couldn't get their accommodation needs met. And that's not because the services don't want to do that. They're actually operating at over 30% capacity. So they're seeing, on average, 30% more people than they actually have the bandwidth to support. And I've heard stories of services supporting over 300% more people than they've been funded to support. This is just about the wave of people that need that help. And we know that at a time when more people than ever need our help, we don't have the housing supply to meet that demand. And I just want to put it out there to be clear, we cannot solve homelessness without housing. 57,000 people on the housing waiting list. Every year in New South Wales, about 70,000 houses get approved to be built, about 34,000 get built, and about 700 of those are social housing. So at that rate, with 57,000 people on the housing waiting list, it'll actually take us 80 years to meet the need that we have today, not even considering the future need. And we know affordable rentals are just not affordable, and they're not available, with less than 1% of rentals available for people on low income or the pension. Thank you. So we know that the government invests $1.2 billion into specialist homelessness services, but it's just not enough to meet demand. At $42 a day per person who's needing support, New South Wales is the second lowest funded state in the country to support people experiencing homelessness. And those people who are being funded $42 a day are actually costing the state government $31,000 in peripheral services. So just on basic economics, we're spending less than we're actually to support people than we are in the periphery supports around ED, justice and other services. Thank you. So that's why we've got a three-part plan to end homelessness. And that looks like investing in the supply and sustained supply of social housing, funding services to meet demand, including funding specialist homelessness support services for older people, like the Home at Last project that works, and we know it works, and also coordinating across government so that we can work smarter together for greater impact. So we're calling on the New South Wales Government to end homelessness together to invest an additional $1.79 billion a year. And look, that might seem like a large figure, but that actually just represents 1% or just over 1% of the whole New South Wales state budget, okay? And so, without going into too much detail, we've got particular asks under that, okay? So first we're saying we want to get enough housing. What's enough housing? We're saying 10% of all residential dwellings to be social housing by 2050. And we're also saying that to achieve that, we need to bring the state government together with the federal government together, as well as the experts in the room, people who deliver services and people with lived experience, because we can't do this alone. This is not a problem for one organisation. We must work together. There's a bit of a graph there to show you how a way the government could work towards achieving that for the housing policy. People in the room, we're talking about solutions like inclusionary zoning. It just means every time you build 15 units or more, some of them will go to people who can afford them and some of them will go to social housing. Okay, so that means that we're creating communities for everybody, housing for all. We're also talking about funding support services to meet demand, and we're asking for an additional $152 million per year. And that $152 million would immediately support services to deliver on the 30% capacity that they're seeing coming through the door. This is not about seeing more people, this is just about being able to keep the doors open. And we're calling for the support for Aboriginal community controlled organisations to be funded to scale up and champion and lead on solutions for First Nations communities. And we're calling for 5-year contracts because we need our services to have certainty to innovate and respond to people. And at the moment they get 12-month to 12-month contracts and they can't plan in that environment. Okay. So we're also asking to coordinate across all levels of government, and that's why we're calling for a homelessness commissioner, somebody who can help us to bring us all together to work smarter together for greater impact. Okay, so for us to achieve that, what will actually happen is inject $23 billion into the economy over the forward estimates. We have more robust and resilient communities, and we can save the government up to $1.5 billion per year. So this investment is actually good for the economy and for society. When we think about older people, what would this investment mean for them? Well, it would mean that we could invest in programs like Home at Last. We know that coordinated services for older people prevent homelessness and support older people out of homelessness. We're also calling for lowering the priority age. I refer to it in the inquiry as a cruel policy that would make any person wait until they're 80 years of age to be given consideration for priority housing. We know it's difficult to navigate the priority housing list, and that's why we need investment in housing so that we can better support the most vulnerable in our community. But not lowering the age does not take away the need for those people, and that's why we need to think about this when we approach it and ensure that people are prioritised based on their need, not just on the arbitrary guidelines that we have in place. And we also need to address root causes, and that's why these forums are so important, because we're raising awareness together. I look forward to working with you all to end homelessness. Thank you.
Trina, we've got good speakers today, haven't we? Bringing so much information. It's just a shame we didn't have a much larger audience, and it would be a really good Q&A, you know, ABC Q&A, and it's given me some ideas to go back and see what I can get happening there. Stan Grant, I know, would be more than prepared to listen, so I think if we can do that and take back some of the information that we have here today, it's a big step forward. Now we're going to have a Q&A. I want to, and both Emma and Trina, would you like to come up? We can stand here at the mic. Okay, anybody have a question? Our roving Mike Cress over there, Dee. She said, any questions?
If you could come up to the front.
Hi, thank you so much for both of your presentations. I was wondering, Emma, if you could, and you mentioned it as well, Trina, about the impacts of the natural disasters on New South Wales and the compounding impacts on housing. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about what your research has shown in terms of the lived experience of people that are having those impacting compounding factors, particularly in the northern New South Wales region?
Thanks, Fiona. I think I have to defer to Teresa's research for that. I mean, look, the census data was before the real impacts there, but I think what we're seeing is that what we already knew was a housing crisis is being absolutely compounded by that, and it's people who have higher incomes who are better able to cope in those circumstances. You know, a lot of the housing responses that are being put in place and a lot of the kind of support is for homeowners. What happens to renters is that their house is flooded. The landlord becomes responsible and they simply have to move. And what Therese is starting to find when she's up there is that a lot of people are simply having to shift up and shift out. Where they're going, we're not actually sure quite yet. I suspect into cars, I suspect onto people's couches, but it's you know, there's less housing where there was already a crisis. So I think we look forward to reporting back more on that as the interviews progress. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'd also just like to add to Emma's comments. We're seeing that it's not just in the immediate impacts after disasters that this has a long tail for people. A few months ago, I spent time in the South Coast in Viga, where I met with a number of people who were sleeping in tents, some of whom were working, others were older people who had properties that were not insured, that were damaged, that they were locked into mortgages that they couldn't pay. With damaged properties 2.5 years on, but didn't have the means to pay for a rental while they were still funding a mortgage for a house they couldn't live in. Like, this is dystopian, right? And we need to have better initiatives in place to support people. Others who were renting and were unfortunately moved out of those rental properties because as the asset stocks were lowered in the area because of fire and flood, landlords were able to put rents up, and so those tenants were no longer as viable as another tenant who could pay more, and so they were then forced to sleep in cars and in tents. This is a serious issue and a growing issue. with 54,000 people in rental stress as a result of the impacts of COVID and natural disasters, as found in the NCOS aftershock report. This is a wave that we are dealing with and a wave that is coming, and we do need to take action together to respond.
We have 2 questions coming in from our online viewers. One is slightly provocative. It says, tell me, how many houses could be built with all the salaries paid to those thousands employed in the homelessness industry who keep screaming for more funding for services that do exactly what, apart from shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic? That's the first question. And the second question...
Well, I'm happy to answer that one first.
Okay.
Obviously, we're an industry body, and I'm proud to stand and represent the homelessness services who work tirelessly on the front line. What they do is support people at the worst crisis in their life to have access to a safe place to call home and to support them to rebuild their lives and thrive. And we know when a service can support a person and they've got access to a house, that 90% of people can be supported to sustain that tenancy for years on. We recently met with people who've been supported by services. They're your tenant reps, they're gardening club coordinators, they're art, Sunday art class people. These are members of our community, not the people who are experiencing homelessness, right? And so these services are frontline, like a nurse, like a doctor, and they're critical to the infrastructure of our community. And so the change they make is huge and lasting.
Thank you. Let me get to the other question, and it refers to how many people are given a public housing place after the age of 80, having been on the over 80 preference list?
I'd be happy to take that on notice and try to find that out. Ginny, you might know, but I don't have that answer right to hand, but I'd be happy to take that on notice and come back through the group and we can circulate it.
Yeah, I think a broader point though is that the age cutoff actually acts as a deterrent to a lot of people. So in a lot of the interviews that I've done, women will say, I'm homeless, these are the conditions I'm living in, but I've gone to the office and they've told me that I can't get priority listing because I'm not 80 yet and there is nothing else. All I am is a low-income older woman who doesn't have somewhere to live. And so it acts as a deterrent as much as it does anything else.
Hi, Emma Maiden from Uniting. Can I just thank you for your presentations and to you as well, Michelle, for telling your story. It was very powerful. I worry that the issue has just been so neglected, and now, as you said, the demand is only going to be increasing, that the governments, it seems, too big to solve. How can we give government the confidence that they can solve this problem? And I also just wanted to ask in relation to inclusive zoning, how can we make sure that if we do achieve inclusive zoning, that it actually does get delivered in developments, because we know sometimes what's said at the planning stages doesn't necessarily what comes out the other end.
There's 2 questions there. I think the first question is because we have good evidence. We can fill our stadiums with evidence about how we can respond more effectively to homelessness and get outcomes that are lasting. I think there's good examples internationally, but also here in Australia, that can demonstrate where we can put an investment and see long-term change for people. And so what we're really asking for is the courage to do that at scale and the courage to see that take a step forward together to achieve that. That's why we're really strongly supportive of the national plan from the federal government and National Housing and Homelessness Plan, and we hope that will help pave the way for longer-term outcomes. In terms of inclusionary zoning, if the planning conditions are in place, you can't not do it. So we can see examples of that. One example, I worked on the London Legacy Chobham Manor community in the UK just after the Olympics, when all the athletes' villages were available, and we were able to secure 40%, and we thought that wasn't good at the time. When I think about it now, we can't even get 3% here. 40% of those properties went to social and affordable housing, slightly different terminology in the UK, but the principles are the same. That the housing goes to people who are on lower incomes. And that is achievable and working well. So I think we can learn from others, and we can also apply what we know here to get lasting change. And that's why at Homelessness New South Wales, we're positive and optimistic about the future, because we think we can work better together with government, and we look forward to the next government of New South Wales working with us on that.
And a big welcome to the Older Women's Network Theatre Group. Now, they've been performing since 1987, and nothing can stop them, not even a pandemic. They use songs, comedy, poetry, puppetry to educate audiences about the important social order in order to change the world for the better. They're going to perform 2 songs, Who's Counting? And the other one is I Still Call Mazda My Home.
Wait.
Indigenous Australians need justice to be done. counting? Kate and Anne lost everything. It's hard to understand. Who's counting? The devastation of the floods, fires, storms from hell. Who's counting? Climate change has left them without a place to drown. Who's counting? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 more. We want to know who's counting.
Surreal. Thank you. It was wonderful. You always surprise me. No, but you do. Thank you. I mean, and you have other performances later on too, which is wonderful. Now we're going to move on to about political speakers. The Honourable Natasha McLaren-Jones, MLC, Minister for Families and Communities and Minister for Disability Services, but was unable to be with us today due to a prior commitment. But she's provided us with a pre-recorded video.
I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the Aboriginal land on which we are meeting today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to all Aboriginal people participating in the session today, and I would also like to commend Ageing on the Edge, New South Wales Housing for Age Action Group, and also the Older Women's Network for convening this forum. I want to acknowledge your leadership, contribution and participation in the important public policy debate and discussion relating to housing and older persons. Your advocacy, commitment and passion is well recognised and valued. Thank you for your opportunity to speak today, and my apologies for not being able to join you, but I have a pre-existing commitment. The New South Wales community and social service sector have faced significant challenges over recent years, from the bushfires in 2019-20 to drought, the COVID-19 pandemic, and more recently floods. We know that major crises like these can make or break sectors. And I'm so proud that through these testing times, the relationship between the New South Wales Liberal and National Government and the social services sector has been strengthened. I want to thank the sector for their leadership, commitment and hard work in ensuring that services have the support our communities need, particularly during these unprecedented challenges. The New South Wales Liberal and National Government's priority is for everyone to have a safe and stable place to live. That is why in 2022-23, we are investing $1.2 billion in recurring expenses and $18 million in capital expenditure for homelessness services and social and affordable housing programs. Tackling homelessness and social and affordable housing is a priority for my government. And one of the Premier's priority targets is reducing street sleeping across New South Wales by 50% by 2025. And the latest advice is that we're on track to achieve this. We are funding assertive homelessness outreach, early intervention programs, specialist homelessness services, and social and affordable housing across the state. Our investment in specialist homelessness services has more than doubled since 2013-14, increasing by approximately 118% to $301 million in 2022-23. The New South Wales Homelessness Strategy 2018 to 2023 sets out our government's plan to address homelessness with a focus on assisting people to remain housed and empowering people to address issues that put them at risk and providing pathways out of homelessness. Specialist homelessness services are available to people at risk of or experiencing homelessness, including older women, and provides a range of support services to ensure that people can stay in their current home or help them secure safe and stable accommodation. I have visited and seen a number of these services in operation across the community and recognise the important and critical role they play. In October 2021, the New South Wales Liberal and National Government announced record investment of $426.6 million over 4 years to expand Core and Cluster, to deliver and operate around 75 extra women's refuges. We are also investing $30 million for approximately 80 new small-scale social homes, including new co-living homes for older women as part of the New South Wales Homelessness Strategy. Through the Together Home program, we're investing $122.1 million to support people street sleeping into stable accommodation with wraparound support, and this also supports older women. I'm amazed by the wonderful work that supported accommodation and homelessness services provide in supporting women into safe places and people in crisis. In addition, the New South Wales Liberal and National Government continues to increase our investment in the provision and maintenance of social and public housing. In the 2022-23 New South Wales budget, our housing package will invest over $300 million as part of the capital maintenance program. We are rejuvenating close to 16,000 social homes and delivering an additional 120 homes through the Together Home Transition program. Once again, I want to thank you for your advocacy, leadership and collaboration. I look forward to continuing to work with you as we focus on what really matters, the best outcomes for the people of New South Wales, and in particular, best outcomes for older people in our communities. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Rose Jackson. Rose is the Labor member of the New South Wales Legislative Council and the Shadow Minister for Water, Housing and Homelessness. Rose has supported Ageing on the Edge recommendations at different events, including the Home at Last report, launched in December 2021. And she was one of the committee members of the Social Issues Committee that ran the inquiry into older people and homelessness. Thank you, Rose Jackson.
Thank you, Glenn Marie. It's wonderful to be here. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and extending that acknowledgement to any Aboriginal people here. As I always acknowledge, the unfinished business of reconciliation extends to so many areas, housing being first and foremost. Aboriginal people continue to experience disproportionate disadvantage when it comes to homelessness and housing stress, and I'm sure we all recommit ourselves to the ongoing process of reconciliation. I'd also really love to thank and acknowledge the people who shared their lived experience, Michelle and others. Sometimes I think, particularly when you hear sort of long listicles of numbers and statistics, what really makes change in our society. And look, the facts matter and the statistics matter, of course. The work that Emma and her team have done is incredibly powerful. But as a politician, I have to say, equally as important is stories and narrative and lived experience. That's what really makes change. When you're trying to persuade people to think differently about something, change their mind maybe, reorder their priorities. Facts and statistics matter, but that persuasion is really driven, I think, by the connection that is created by sharing lived experience. And I know it can be hard and uncomfortable sometimes for people to do that, but it really matters. It really makes a difference, so thank you. We've only been given 5 minutes to speak, and fair enough, because, we don't want to just hear all from politicians. So I just want to briefly indicate a couple of my fundamental values, priorities, a little bit about what Labor has indicated we're already willing to do, and a couple of things that we want to keep going forward on. Look, housing is a fundamental right. The right to shelter is something that is core to me and drives my approach to this issue. Now, we do need to untangle the complicated web of policy and market factors that have taken housing from shelter to a financial investment. And that, I think, fundamental shift that has occurred over many years and as a consequence of many decisions is not going to be easy to untangle. But the first step is acknowledging we have a problem. We have a problem because housing is no longer shelter, it is a financial investment. And I acknowledge that, and that drives my approach to policy making in this area. I think we need much more leadership and intervention from government. The market has failed. Market solutions will not deliver the change we need. We need urgency, leadership and coordination from government. And if Labor has the chance to form government, that's what I hope you will see from a Labor government. I don't want to get too political because it's perhaps unfair as the Minister isn't here, but the election is in less than 50 days. It's obviously my view this government has failed. It has failed to deliver the change we need. Past performance is the best indicator of future performance, and I think given another 4, 8, 12 years, we are going to go into an even deeper housing crisis hole if things do not change. This government doesn't even acknowledge things aren't working. It doesn't even acknowledge we have a problem. And I don't think that it sets a good path forward to doing things differently. And I fundamentally believe that is what we need to do. I won't give you all the statistics on the social housing waiting list, that the numbers of homelessness that we've seen, that they increase, the fact that we're going backwards when it comes to social housing. It's all in Emma's excellent report and a lot of other work that organisations like Homelessness New South Wales, HAG and others have been doing. You know the facts. You don't need me to tell you them. What you need to hear from me is that I acknowledge that it's a problem and what we're going to do differently. So just briefly, I want to say to start with, Labor supports all of the recommendations that the Parliamentary Inquiry into Older People and Homelessness made. It was a privilege, but also deeply and personally challenging and confronting to be part of that inquiry. All of the recommendations are supported by me, and Labor in government will look to implement all of them. I was disappointed to see the government's report refer on so many occasions to support in principle. The government's response is available online for those who want to see in more detail, but many recommendations were indicated with support in principle. That's not a luxury that government has. Government doesn't get to say, well, I support it in principle, but I'm not going to do anything about it. If that is your approach, give up government. Get out of government. Government is for making decisions. It is for doing things. If you want to support something in principle, that's fine. You don't get to control the levers of power. You don't get to be the ones that make the decisions. Government is about decisions. It is about priorities, and it is about doing things. That's what I believe government is for. So I was very disappointed to see that. That's not Labor's approach. We have already committed to
establishing Homes New South Wales as a single social housing agency in New South Wales. We're going to abolish the Land and Housing Corporation, abolish DCJ housing, create a centralised new agency, Homes New South Wales, to deliver. Dinny's telling me 1 minute. We are going to accelerate maintenance in social housing. We are going to build more social and affordable housing. We've committed to 30% social and affordable housing on surplus government land and a dedicated build-to-rent scheme for affordable rental in the regions. Thank you for talking about the experience of regional New South Wales, Michelle. We've announced a range of rental reforms. We're going to abolish no grounds evictions. We're going to allow pets in rentals. We are going to outlaw rent bidding. We are going to introduce portable bonds. We are going to introduce a rental commissioner. We have committed to 5-year stable funding, a secure funding for homelessness organisations. I know I just ran through a quick list there. I might try and talk to people afterwards. We've also released a comprehensive housing document that is available online for people who want a little bit more detail about the suite of things Labor has already done. We know there's more to do. Ongoing conversations about minimum standards, about accessibilities, about the work that we need to do in terms of establishing service provision organisations that really work for people. The voices of lived experience will be central to that. So thank you for inviting me. I'll wrap up now to allow space for others, but I really look forward to having the opportunity to collaborate with you, not just to talk about these things, but to actually do something about them. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. You never fail to disappoint. And speaking of that, our next speaker is Alex Greenwich. Alex is the independent member for Sydney in the New South Wales Parliament and was first elected in 2012. And he's my local member. Where will I be on election day?
Thank you very much, Glenn Marie. Glenn Marie was actually the Sydney electorate Woman of the Year last year for the amazing work that she has done being a face of older women's homelessness and so bravely sharing her story. And you give so much time to these events. Can we all please get that? I'd also like to acknowledge my colleagues that are here, Rose Jackson, who we just passionately heard from. Abigail Borley, the Greens member of the Upper House, is also here. And my neighbour MP, Jenny Leung, the Greens member for Newtown, joined us as well. And Jenny has been just such a fierce advocate for the rights of renters, for the rights of housing, and I'm really grateful to work with her. I'm also glad to see the Sydney candidate for the Labor candidate for the seat of Sydney, Sky Tito, here as well. It's really good that we're able to bring so many people together on this important issue. I wanted to start by talking about Aunt Rosie. Many of the services here would probably know her. She was an older Aboriginal woman who went in and out of homelessness, who lived in the Cross. She was someone who, for people in the Cross, was very much the face of old women's homelessness. She passed away only a few weeks ago, but it was her generosity of spirit that continues in our community. She was able to bring together hundreds of people for a memorial service and really saw us all work to commit to do more and to work more, particularly to target older women's homelessness in New South Wales. We know that the face of homelessness is changing. We've heard that all here today. The number of people over 55 experiencing homelessness is increasing, and older women are disproportionately affected. Women are especially vulnerable because of reduced life savings from past family and domestic violence and caring for children and other family members. We also know we're in a rental crisis, and older women on low incomes are experiencing exorbitant rent increases that they cannot pay, often getting evicted to make way for higher paying tenants. They almost always miss out on applications for new homes as they compete with tenants on better incomes. Many are forced into temporary, substandard conditions and into foregoing necessities like food and medication at a time when they are experiencing increased costs associated with ageing and the need to focus on their health. I've advocated and will continue to advocate for women over 55 unable to secure affordable rental accommodation, people who've used all their life savings and superannuation to supplement their rent until they face eviction. Meanwhile, they are unable to secure social housing due to long wait times because successive governments have failed to build housing stock to meet demand. As Trina said, the way to combat homelessness is to build homes for those who need it. Older people are not eligible for priority housing until they reach 80. And let's be honest, what we mean is if they reach 80. By this time, their health and welfare will have deteriorated significantly, having lived in unsafe and insecure situations, as we said, foregoing the basic needs like food, heating, and suffering from that uncertainty. Facing housing insecurity or homelessness is challenging at any age, but for older citizens, the impact can be severe and directly affect their health. It doesn't, of course, have to be this way. New South Wales is a wealthy state with the economic resources and a committed sector capable of reversing the trend in homelessness among older people and particularly women. Victoria has developed their one-stop shop for older people facing housing insecurity before they reach crisis point. And this has proven to be a great success and was one of the recommendations of the recent parliamentary inquiry into homelessness in older people. New South Wales should have a similar scheme. I've repeatedly called on the government to introduce such a specialist model and to lower the age of priority social housing from 80 to 55 years to prevent homelessness. Secure housing is the first, sorry Jenny, yes, 1 minute, thank you. Secure housing is the first line of defence in ensuring health and wellbeing in older people, and I'll continue to push for that. I'd also just like to finish with 2 points. One, later today I will be meeting with a group of candidates who are running as independents right across largely the North Shore and Northern Beaches to brief them on today's session and to get them to also commit to these policy directions. We know the next Parliament will have an increased crossbench and we will work together to drive whoever forms government to take this issue seriously and deliver on it. And something that Glenn Marie was talking about in terms of family structures and people not wanting to talk about their homelessness also dawned on me. I think many of you remember I was in a series called Filthy Rich and Homeless. And one of the stories that wasn't shared, but still sticks with me today, is I spoke to a gay guy who was homeless, and he said it was easier for him to come out to his family being gay than it was for him to come out being homeless. There is so much, I understand that people who are experiencing homelessness unnecessarily feel that shame. They shouldn't. Government should feel that shame, and that should motivate us to do better and take action. So thank you for today.
And Alex, thank you for being such a big supporter of Ageing on the Edge. And he's been vocal, as we know, issues of older people with homelessness on many occasions, including his last speech in Parliament in December last year. And now we come on to another wonderful woman. I have to say, I've loved these speeches today. I mean, I just hope they've all been recorded. These are great. Our last speaker is Jenny Leon. Jenny is the Greens member for the electorate of Newtown in the New South Wales Legislative Assembly. She's the Greens New South Wales spokesperson for housing, renters' rights and women's rights, and is a passionate activist, campaigner, feminist and equality advocate. We're very happy to see that the New South Wales Greens have incorporated the key Ageing on the Edge recommendations into their election platform. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you so much, Marie, and can I join with everyone else by acknowledging that we are here on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise, as other speakers have said, that the ongoing struggle to recognise that this land was never ceded, that sovereignty remains, and we need to ensure that First Nations people are making decisions about the land and the country that they own and have been appallingly displaced from as a result of colonisation is front and centre of all that we do, whether it's talking about housing, justice, policing, or any reforms that we're making commitments to between now and the March election and beyond. I want to also thank Uncle Brendan for the welcome. I want to acknowledge my Greens parliamentary colleague Abigail Boyd, who is also the chair of the recent parliamentary inquiry in relation to that, older women and housing. And I want to also acknowledge my parliamentary colleagues Rose Jackson, Alex Greenwich, and say that it is really, really great that everyone has made the time to be able to be here today, because it shows our commitment and recognition that this is such a critical issue that has been not addressed for so long. I wanted to take a step back for a minute and highlight the fact that you see the government, this New South Wales government, talking about the New South Wales housing strategy. I don't know if you've looked at it closely, but I looked closely and it doesn't seem anywhere there's any commitment to ending homelessness. I mean, to me, a housing strategy, first and foremost, should be setting a goal to end homelessness in this state, but there's not even an aspirational desire to be able to engage with that process. We've heard from Trina and seen Homelessness New South Wales plan that unlike the very, very challenging time that we've just been through with the pandemic and not knowing how we could cure ourselves of COVID-19, that when it comes to this housing crisis, there are obvious solutions now. Like, we hear the stories, right? We can hear the stats. We hear the stories from people like Michelle, the endless case studies provided. We hear the statistics given to us by Emma and repeated endlessly by politicians. But what we don't see is the delivering of a response that is going to solve this crisis. What I can give as an absolute commitment on behalf of the Greens today is that we absolutely support all of the 40 recommendations of the recent inquiry into older women and homelessness. But we also want to be committed to the fact that we will work closely with Ageing on the Edge, with Homelessness New South Wales and HARG, whoever forms next government in New South Wales, that, as Rose pointed out, saying in principle support or giving a promise that there's a commitment to that support is not enough. And so whoever forms government after the next election, I can give you my commitment that my Greens colleague Abigail Boyd, who knows that reporting intimately, will be absolutely ensuring those recommendations are met. Beyond that, I want to give a commitment to this. We can't keep talking about the idea of the rental crisis without addressing the rental crisis. We need to have a plan to cut rents and to ban unfair evictions in New South Wales as an urgent priority. It was shameful to see last year that a Greens bill that would have seen a rent freeze immediately introduced at the same time as the energy cap freeze was introduced was not supported by the Liberal National Government, and that the Labor Party, in speaking towards that urgency motion, said that they also did not support a rent freeze. The Greens are committed to removing the profit motive out of the rental crisis, because we know that if we don't do that, people will continue to sleep in their cars. That is an unacceptable reality for anybody in this society. I give you our commitment that we recognise the value and support of specialist homelessness services and want to see a massive increase to their funding. We also want to make sure that they're not imposed with endless cycles of short-term tenders and project funding. And finally, we want to see a massive investment in public, social and affordable housing, because we know that the solution is there. If we want to end the housing crisis in this state, we build more public and affordable housing. It is as simple as that. The market alone will not do it. Just increasing housing supply does not solve the homelessness crisis. We need to increase the supply of public, social and affordable housing, and I give you my commitment on behalf of the Greens that we will continue to do that work, whoever forms government after March. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny. Gosh. Okay, now you've got time to ask everybody a question. We have about 20 minutes, but for those in the room, we've got the roaming mic, as you know, with Diddy, and then also put your hand up if you've got a question and she'll raise it to you with the mic. For those online, if you have a question, please put it in the chat. I want to now ask Fiona if she would kindly come up, because she isn't ready to moderate the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Glenn-Marie. I also want to quickly thank the Quiet Achievers, Yumi and Ginny, in the room today, who have been absolutely instrumental in putting this event together. Yumi's doing all of the tech support, and I believe that that the moderated questions are coming from the Zoom room as well. Great, we'll get to them in a moment. Thank you so much for the three members of Parliament that we have joining us today. I have a couple of questions for you all. I might start with you, Rose, if that's okay. So it was really great to see that the Labor Party was tackling the housing issues in New South Wales with its fresh ideas for housing and the New South Wales housing affordability policy. Now that the federal government is also a Labor government, or potentially you'll be forming power as well, how will you work with the federal government to deal with this national housing crisis?
Hopefully very closely. I think in a way the federal government has shown us, I think, again, that power of government. I referenced it in my speech, my expectation that government identifies issues and then takes action. And what we've seen federally for a long time, I think, was a government that didn't prioritise housing, that wasn't interested in leadership in the space. And we've seen, I think, with the election of a federal Labor government, the power and the role that Labor governments can play. They've put $10 billion on the table, as one of a suite of reforms. I think there is a real opportunity for close collaboration. And one thing that I would just say, in terms of specifics, because it's easy for me to say, look, I know Julie well, we'll work together, I think we can do great things, and that's all true. And, people should have that confidence that collaboration will be there. But on the specifics, one thing that I will say is any of the communities plus housing developments that are in train, whether it's in Waterloo, whether it's up in Coffs Harbour with Argyle Estate, whether it's others, that we are able to pause. Some of them unfortunately they've rolled on too long, but any that we are able to pause, to immediately look to partner with the federal government to bring funds online to deliver more social and affordable housing as part of those redevelopments, we will do that. And that is a commitment that I give, because those redevelopments are not delivering nearly enough social and affordable housing. There could be a substantially higher number, and a partnership with a federal government that is interested in funding that, I think, is a real opportunity. So that's a specific commitment that we will give, that we will pause any of those, look to renegotiate with our federal partners to deliver more social and affordable housing. So, that's what hopefully can happen if Labor's elected in March. And I think there is a real opportunity there to do quite a lot.
Thank you so much for that. The next question I have is for you, Alex. As people know, the priority housing age in New South Wales is 80, and the government's argument against lowering the priority age is that it will have a huge impact on wait times, and older people who do have a need will be captured in other priority categories. We know that this isn't the case, as we've heard today, and that this policy is not reflective of the reality for many older people. How would you work with an incoming government to make sure that the priority age is lowered?
Thank you very much for that question. And lowering the priority age has to be a key priority in the next term of government. It should have been in this term of government. But I would flip that as well. When the government is saying that, what they are also saying is, it's okay for cars to provide that form of housing to older women until they're 80. That's not a legitimate answer. We've seen the conversation around housing affordability in this election focus on incentives to buy your home by giving stamp duty reductions, whether it is for first home buyers or properties under a certain value. No conversation about not the same level of conversation about what are we doing for people who are never going to be able to buy their own home, people who need to be able to access social and affordable housing. So what we need to do is lower the age at the same time as we are seeing a huge investment in new social and affordable and community housing. That has to be the priority. Both have to work hand in hand, and it will continue to be a priority of mine, and I'll work with whoever forms government to see that happen.
Fantastic, thank you. Now for you, Jenny. We're all in agreement that there is a housing crisis and we need to build more social and affordable housing. If the New South Wales Greens were to hold the balance of power post-election, what would your party take to the negotiation table?
That's the question everyone would like to know. I think
you know, at risk of giving you a politician answer, I think it's been no secret since before I was elected in 2015 that the rental crisis was front and foremost of my mind. I like to say in many ways, you know, and it speaks to the good lefty progressive people that live in the electorate of Newtown, that Newtown leads the way. Sadly, we led the way on the rental crisis. When I was elected in 2015, we had 50% of the electorate as renters. We were seeing the impacts of insecure rental crisis, unfair evictions, rising rents, lack of maintenance support, and we have one of the highest density of public housing in the state in our electorate. So despite the Daily Telegraph version, there's a whole lot of people that are living in Newtown that are not your sort of Chardonnay latte sipping socialists doing very well out of the world. And those people are struggling. And since being elected, I have seen the pointy end of that public housing and the rental crisis increase dramatically and then spread across the state. What we need to absolutely do is put a ban on unfair evictions, because at the moment the threat of that eviction for no reason means you cannot challenge a rent increase, you can't ask for your oven to be fixed, you can't even advocate to say there's a hole in my roof or whatever for fear that you'll be kicked out of your home for having a whinge, a legitimate whinge, and then find yourself back in a horrifically tight housing market. But we need to go further than that, because the rents have increased astronomically now that, yes, absolutely want to see an immediate rent freeze, but it's not enough. Like, we have to be talking about how we're cutting rents in New South Wales to address that. In practice, it's very clear we've given our commitment to the Homelessness New South Wales demands. We've given our commitment to see everybody in New South Wales have a right to a safe, secure and affordable home. If those that want to form government in the next election have not been listening, then it is on them to pay attention. The evidence is there, the research is there, and I think it's pretty clear that renting is very, very high on my list.
That's one quick point, just because Jenny and I are asked this question about hung parliament and minority governments all the time, I just want to make the point that regardless of the shape of the next parliament, those of us on the crossbench are dedicated to working to address housing for older women, combating homelessness and supporting renters' rights. In the past 10 years I've been in Parliament, the building's been in all sorts of different shapes. I have seen a new community housing being built in the Sydney electorate. I've seen 30 units retained in Millers Point, particularly for older people. We've seen the funding for Hammond Care in King's Cross, which is providing aged care housing largely for older people. I got the government to commit to that target in reducing street-based sleeping. Jenny has been an amazing advocate for her community and across the state. So I understand, people look at the parliament and they don't think the two major parties are exciting the electorate, but regardless of the outcome, those of us on the crossbench are going to fight hard for you and will continue to deliver for you.
And just to say the other benefit that we have in that space, and to back Alex in on that, and I think that the power and potential Rose's comment of being able to work collaboratively with the federal government goes to the same strength of where the negotiation power sits to keep pushing that Labor federal government to take it further when it comes to housing, and gives us the space to be able to look at a collaborative future relationship that would mean that a potential future Labor state government working with the federal government, working with a good progressive crossbench committed to housing, might actually finally see some of the movement and shift that we need. The Greens have that experience of a balance of power situation federally, being able to then bring that relationship and negotiation to a state level to see that change is obviously absolutely critical.
We have a couple of questions. Are these from Zoom or from? Yeah, okay. So this is a question to Rose from Jane. And I think it actually applies to everyone because all three of you have committed to all 40 recommendations of the parliamentary inquiry. Is that correct? Yeah, that's fantastic. So I guess it's a clarification question more than anything, and that is about whether or not Labor is committing to increasing social housing by 5,000 a year, reducing the priority housing age, and establishing a home at last type service in New South Wales.
The recommendations of the parliamentary inquiry were in fact couched in much more general language, which is why in fact it was so disappointing that the government couldn't sign up to them. I mean, those aren't commitments that I'm giving today, that we will absolutely, definitely fund and do those things immediately on election to government. I actually think it's better to be upfront with people. I think one of the reasons people don't like and trust politicians is because sometimes we're not clear about what it is and isn't we're saying that we're going to do. And I just prefer to be honest. I don't have the commitment from my colleagues to fund those things, all of those things right now. They will cost a lot of money. But I am committed to the recommendations of the parliamentary inquiry, which chart a path forward on them. As I said, I thought that the fact that the government couldn't even sign up to the idea of acknowledging that these things were important and acknowledging that we needed to develop a roadmap to deliver them was pretty underwhelming. So if people are interested in what our commitments are, read the recommendations, the language is there. I'm committed to doing those things. We've committed specifically to delivering a number of things, and I outlined Homes New South Wales, rental reform, a path forward on affordable housing in the regions particularly, mandated social and affordable housing for housing developments in New South Wales. So those are specific commitments. Some of those other things I can't commit to doing right now, but there is a path forward on them and we're signed up for that.
Thank you so much and for your honesty as well, Rose. I believe we have a question from Roshi on the floor. Yeah. I have to grab the mic and run it down. Thanks, Ginny.
Thanks, Ginny. Hello, everyone. So I just have a quick question for all three. So it's great that the thought and the idea is we're building more affordable housing, which is wonderful. However, this takes time. So what do we do in the here and now? What's going to happen right now in the interim? How are we going to help these people?
I mean, it is a great question. And I mean, one of the things that we need to do is follow up the recommendations of the parliamentary inquiry, I think that Jenny, you were on, in relation to meanwhile use. So there are a range of opportunities that we can have to deliver short-term temporary transitional accommodation to people by using things like aged care facilities, motels, hotels, and bringing them online very quickly as emergency transitional accommodation. Because, I mean, there's nothing that I can do to say, well, you know, we can't build houses quicker than the literal time it takes to construct a house. But there are things that we can do to immediately bring online transitional accommodation. And again, one of the unbelievably frustrating things is that I see all the time is the number of very obvious opportunities there are to do that are just not being pursued with any urgency or any creativity. Just last week I was down in Bega, regional housing crisis biting really hard in the far south coast of New South Wales. Camps of tents and caravans right across down from Moruya to Eden. There is a facility called Nalika Lodge in Eden, which is sitting there vacant, could be being used right now. The community are crying out for it to be used as temporary accommodation, transitional accommodation, particularly for older women. Yet the member there, Michael Holland, can't even get a letter back from the planning minister about bringing that opportunity online right now. So that's just one of the many examples that are right across New South Wales that I think could be providing immediate assistance to people who desperately need housing.
That's a really important question, because we also don't want to use the until we build 5,000 houses a year as the excuse for not providing the housing support that is needed. And there are a range of things we can do, from increasing the percentage of social and affordable housing in developments that are currently underway, including in areas like Waterloo. We were doing so well during COVID, and I know all the services here, we all just are so upset at the lost opportunity where we had people experiencing homelessness in supported care, in hotels and accommodation, and we didn't keep that going. So those are two key things. We've already got the model, we used it during the lockdowns, but in terms of increasing the percentage in developments that are currently underway, that's a critical way we can do that.
Can I just jump in and say there's a couple of other things that we can do. The first would be to actually just make it really clear that what we've got here is a vacancy rate that exists. Like every census shows us a vacancy rate, but we have people that are too interested in the idea of profiting from the housing market. We know now that there are housing and homelessness services that could, if they were resourced as of now, could help people try and find temporary accommodation, meanwhile use other solutions, but they are so overstretched, as we heard from Trina, that there's nobody there that is actually in a position to start coming up with some of these more creative solutions, because there's no one in the mix in terms of those services. The other thing that I just want to note, and I think it's really, really critical, yes, we need to solve this immediate problem now, but we know that Ageing on the Edge has 3 clear recommendations as to what is needed to be able to address this right now, and they are not being addressed. We don't see commitments from the major parties on them, and I think part of my concern about that is there's a fudging. Like Trina talks about 57,000 people on the waiting list. I mean, I don't want to be like the corrector, but my understanding is it's 57,000 applications. Yeah. So it's actually in the order of over 100,000 people. Part of the reason why future government wants to commit to lowering the age of eligibility for public housing is they know that will increase the number drastically, and they want to look like they're reducing the number, not increasing it. They're not actually worried about people being able to access the homes. So yes, there's more we can do. Councils can also be empowered in really, really significant ways to make that change. And we need to open up the conversation. Part of it is setting a goal to say we want to end homelessness, and we're not going to tolerate the idea of people being evicted into homelessness. That means making sure older women are in a situation where they are able to stay in their private rental and supported with funds and assistance to be able to stay where they are in place, not forced out of their private rental into homelessness.
Okay, we have to wrap it up. I'm really sorry. I know we have gone a little bit over time, but we have these 3 fantastic advocates with us, and I do want to make the most of their time given the proximity to the election. So I'm going to ask you in maybe 15 seconds or less each to tell us what is the one priority for each of you in housing for the upcoming election. Rose, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I mean,
read our Fresh Start for Housing document. I want to be the Minister for Housing and deliver those things.
Look, I was just so moved and heartbroken by the we still call our Mazda home. I think we should be able to say in New South Wales, older women are not going to be living in their cars.
Yeah, we need a commitment to end homelessness. It shouldn't be some pie in the sky concept. And so to me, I will keep saying that over and over again and demanding that any future government of New South Wales will say that we will end homelessness, that is a priority, not just one sector, not just one bit, not just lower the waiting list. Like actually there is no excuse for anyone to be homeless in this state, and that is what I am 100% committed to and that the Greens are committed to.
I commit to these things too.
Thank you. Before we finish up, I just wanted to go hark back to something you said, Rose, about the importance of telling your story and the importance of lived experience in influencing politicians. Obviously, we have 3 politicians here who are passionate about the issue, but we can't say that about everybody. And so if you do have a lived experience of housing stress and homelessness, I really urge you to have a look at our website, download our advocacy toolkit and get in touch with your local candidates and local MPs and tell your story, and you too may be able to influence some people that may be not as on board as the 3 fantastic people that we have today. Thank you so much for your time. We really, really appreciate your ongoing commitment. Thank you.
Okay, let's go. We've got our final theatre performance, and I've got one more, but a few words from me before we finish today. Please welcome back the Older Women's Network Theatre Group. And I think today, let me see. Not dead yet. Yes, okay, and it's performing Not Dead Yet.
I get up each morning and dust off my wits. I pick up the paper and read the obits. If my name is still missing, I know I'm not dead, so I have a good breakfast and go back to bed. Okay, everybody, let's do it. Sorry.
Society keeps telling us your past are used by date. Women over 45 are treated second rate. We're here to let you know that every old year's of worth. We vote and fight for what is right and give our honest breath. We're not dead. That's what we say. We're not dead. Not yet. Forever let us raise our voices high. Life is like a marathon. We will raise the sweat. Don't be fooled, here's a threat, we're not dead yet. Don't buy sweet bananas, we may not last that long. But while we're here, you're not so fear, we're feisty and we're strong. We're tough and full of passion, we are the wrinkled set. We won't shut up, we won't give in, we're not dead yet. We're not dead. That's what we said. We're not dead. Not yet. Forever let us raise our voices high. Life is like a marathon. We will raise the sweat. Don't mess with us, we get upset. And if we sneeze, our pants get wet. Our teeth are holes, and yet they're set. And ready to gobble a big baguette. We may be old, but don't you fret. We order our pills on the internet. And we will die without regret. Oh. We're not dead yet.
All the Women's Network Theatre Group. 85 Bob, I love that song, I totally relate. Now, our final speaker today, Yumi. Let's welcome Yumi Lee, CEO, Old Women's Network, New South Wales, and she'll thank the speakers. She worked so hard the entire day and did a really great.
Yes, you can tell from the tech problems that I shouldn't give up my day job. So thank you to the theatre group once again. I have the privilege of listening to them rehearse every week. And still, when I listen to that song, I still call my master home. It never fails to move me to tears, no matter how many times I hear it. So they'll be singing in their show called Not Dead Yet at the Adelaide Fringe. So if you have friends in Adelaide, please encourage them to support them, because there's really nothing like an older woman singing about living in their car to let the message sink in that it is no life for anyone, let alone someone who's in the final years of their life. Yes, Miranda.
Yumi, can I just say that we are only a part of the theatre?
Yes.
Yeah, we're just a small.
Yes, yes. So this is a part of the theatre group, absolutely true. And we have a much bigger number who work on the show. And yes, thank you. And thanks a lot to Emma Power and her team who crunched the numbers which revealed the growing number of older people in New South Wales who are renting, the shrinking number of older people in New South Wales who own their own homes, and therefore the inevitable conclusion we can draw that if housing policies are not fixed, there is the undeniable fact that more and more older people, especially older women, will fall into homelessness. We thank all the politicians, some of whom still remain with us, who've given their time to share their perspectives and Minister Natasha McLaren-Jones, who unfortunately couldn't make it today, but we're very grateful that she sent in her video, Rose Jackson, Alex Greenwich, and Jenny Leong. And we want to especially thank you, Michelle Cook, for generously sharing your lived experience with us. We just wonder how many more older women need to tell their stories of trauma and homelessness and housing insecurity before we get the policies which would end it. Thanks also to Trina Jones and Fiona York, who gave the perspective of the sector, and to Glenmarie Frost for your beautiful MC for today. And a special mention to Denny, who coordinated this event. I know how many sleepless nights you've had and how much blood you vomited to get us to this point. Thank you. And we want to thank all the participants, both in here in the room and online, because without your commitment and your continuing interest to push for change, organizations like ours will continue to receive phone calls from women who are thrown into housing stress and homelessness. It is terribly distressing for us receiving those phone calls. Leaving them homeless is a policy choice which doesn't make economic or moral sense. So to those politicians who understand and want to change this, we say thank you. With the New South Wales election coming up, here's our chance to get this on the agenda. So we'll send you a link to the resources, which includes a kit on meeting your MPs and the talking points. So let's walk together to end this nightmare. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming.